This week's parsha has the basic faith, so to speak, of the Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, built into it. It's the parsha that has Shema Yisrael. It's the parsha that has the Aseres HaDibros. It's the core principles, we could say, of the Torah and of Judaism, of what we're trying to do in the world. But the parsha is introduced by a personal plea of Moshe. Vaeschanan el Hashem v'yisahi loymor. Moshe mounts an enormous effort of prayer to be allowed to go to Eretz Yisrael. And it is such an enormous effort, and if he literally storms the gates of heaven, that the Rabbon Shalom Kavli Yochel has to say to him, Al Tosev Daber Elai Badover Azehot. That's it. I don't want to hear from you again. Don't talk to me about it again. So the Meforshim all deal with, so to speak, what is Moshe's attitude here? Why is Moshe so adamant? And Kaviyachal on the other side, why is Hashem so adamant that he's not willing to even hear any more from Moshe on this subject? Now, we had before that this occurred because of Moshe hitting the rock instead of speaking to the rock at Mei Meriva. All the Meforshim there discuss what was the sin. And however we'll deal with it, it's very hard to see how the punishment fits the crime. That Moshe should be excluded from Eretz Yisrael for that alone. So the Rambam himself points out in a number of places that it was a cumulative thing. It wasn't, that was like the last thing. But that's not the sole reason. There are many reasons. And that's true in our understanding of the Torah generally. I heard this from Rabbi Yaakov that when, for instance, Chazal made a gzeira, Chazal passed a decree. Let's say, like the second day Yontiv in Chutz La'aretz. So they gave a reason. Right? So the reason was the shluchim didn't get there on time. They didn't know when the real Rosh Chodesh was. So therefore it was a sveika dioma, it was in doubt, and therefore we have a second day Yontiv in Chutz La'aretz. But that reason has, so to speak, been obviated by the fact that we do know when Rosh Chodesh is. We have exact calculations. So I heard that from Rabbi Yaakov a number of times. He said whenever Chazal made a gzeira, they had many reasons. They may have revealed one, but that's not the only one. And therefore, the fact that one of the reasons may no longer feel valid, so to speak, to us, in no way invalidates the gzeira that Chazal made, invalidates the decree. So the Rambam says here the same thing regarding Moshe. Moshe, he hit the rock, he didn't speak to the rock. But that's not the only reason. There are many, and we as human beings can never assess all of the reasons. And therefore we are left many times wondering as to why certain things happen. So for instance, in this week's parsha, there's a famous meshech chachmah. Meir Simcha. And Moshe says, "Vayisaber Hashem bi lamanchem, v'lo shoma Eloi." The Ribono Shalom was angry at me, lamanchem, because of you. What does that mean, lamanchem? We find throughout the Torah, that throughout the years in the desert and everything that occurred, Moshe is the great defender of the Jewish people. And Moshe doesn't want to speak ill of them even when they do things wrong. He speaks to them regarding their sins. But he doesn't complain in heaven regarding the Jewish people. Whatever they do, he defends them in heaven. So then why should he say here, Vayisaber Hashem bi lamanchem, and Ribono Shalom was angry at me, it's not my fault. He would have forgiven me, but lamanchem, because of you, so therefore I can't go either. So the meshech chachmah says a brilliant insight, which has great relevance to us as well, as do all of his comments. He was one of the great seminal thinkers of the 19th and 20th centuries in Jewish life. He says, if Moshe would have gone into Eretz Yisrael, so then the entire generation now, Goy Oretz, those who are coming to Eretz Yisrael, they did not know Moshe from the beginning, as their fathers did, the previous generation. So the previous generation knew Moshe, and they knew him as a human being. That's why we find in Chazal, whenever they spoke to him, they said, Ben Amram. Oh, he's Amram's kid. He grew up with us. We knew him. So even when Moshe becomes the exalted Moshe, and he has to wear a mask on his face, so the Shekhinah permeates from him. Even when Moshe is at the height of his spirituality, 40 days, 40 nights, the Jewish people say, Ki yoish Moshe. The man Moshe is not here. We don't know. Lo yadanu mehoyo lo. We don't know what happened to him. So the generation that knew him like that would never have made him into a god, because of the fact that they grew up with him. They knew it. Not so their children, the generation that's Boy Oretz, the generation that's going to come at the Eretz Yisrael. They never saw Moshe as a human being. They saw this exalted figure. Can't even look at him. So therefore, there was a danger, so to speak. If Moshe would have brought them into Eretz Yisrael, so if Moshe would have been there, the entire process of conquering Eretz Yisrael would have been different. The Medrash teaches us that the presence of Moshe would have made an enormous difference. Yoshua is great, but Yoshua is only a reflection of Moshe. So it takes Yoshua 7 years to conquer the country and 7 years to distribute the land. Moshe would not have had those problems. Moshe operates on a different plane, on a different level completely. So the Jewish people would have said, we are the people of Moshe. We are the cult of Moshe. Moshe becomes more than a human being. And therefore it says, Vayisaber Hashem bi lamanchem, because of you. so to speak, for your sake, I'm not going to go into Eretz Yisrael. Because if I go into Eretz Yisrael, you'll get the wrong idea. You'll start to worship Moshe instead of worshiping only the God of Israel. And that's the same idea that he mentions regarding Lo Yoda Ish Kuroso Arayom Hazeh. No one knows where Moshe is buried. Can you imagine if we knew where Moshe was buried, what an industry that would be?
He wanted to separate Hazara.
Right. There would be no end to it. So we would be the cult of Moshe. And that's a danger. The Ribbono Shel Olam doesn't want that for Klal Yisrael. The Torah doesn't want that for Klal Yisrael. So there's a piyut that we say on Simchas Torah, Moshe meis milo yomus. Moshe is mortal. We don't want to make him more than being mortal. Because that's the line. Once you cross that line, we see what happens in the world with other religions, so to speak, and other cultures, etc. Once you cross the line, then all sorts of things happen. But then it ends up not being the worship of God, ends up being the worship of other things. So that is, that's why the Ribbono Shel Olam tells him, so to speak, Al Tosev Daber Elai Badover Hazeh. Oh, don't talk to me anymore about it. Because if I grant, so to speak, your wish, negative things will occur. Negative things to the Jewish people, things that you yourself don't want to happen. And that's part of the greatness of Moshe, is that he accepts it and he realizes it. So even though he mounts this tremendous, we could say, offensive of prayer that's represented in vaeschanan, and even in the numerical value and the gematria of the word vaeschanan, almost 1,000, unbelievable. The Medrash says that the malachim, the angels in heaven in charge of prayer, could not withstand the charge. It was too much for them. And even the Medrash goes so far as to say that the Ribbono Shel Olam Kaviyachol has to tell them, don't keep it up. Al Tosev Daber Elai Od Badover Hazeh. Because of the fact that it's too much. I can't withstand you. But there are many reasons why. It's an entire situation that exists. And generations change, and leaders change, and people who are effective leader in one generation may not be the same in another generation. And how one generation treats a leader in another generation, that's a different matter completely. That's why Chazal said, Dor Dor V'Dorshov, Dor Dor V'Chachmah. Every generation has its own. The generation of Boy Oretz, of those who come into Eretz Yisrael, is different than the generation of the Dor HaMidbar. Because the Dor HaMidbar was a Dor Deya, was the most intelligent and intellectual generation in Jewish history, but it also had many defects, as we have seen throughout the Chumash. The Dor Boy Oretz is a different one. They may not be the Dor Deya, they are not the Dor that accepted the Torah, but they have other qualities. And therefore, all of this is in the reckoning of Moshe's prayers to go to Eretz Yisrael, and Kaviyachol, God's refusal in not allowing him to go to Eretz Yisrael. So we have to have a general, broader view of the matter than just the narrow issue itself.